It's my great pleasure to participate in this Academy Virtual Summer School of 2023 and as a moderator. And I sincerely hope that this event will encourage everyone to think deeply and critically about contemporary political developments, including the rise of populism worldwide. At the same time, I invite everyone to think about all other related concepts and interconnected processes in this complex world of constant transformation, holy crisis, and wars. So these current challenges can easily be amplified by populist politicians. Current political debates, I would say, are very much focused on the memory of the past and rather lacking a non-apocalyptic vision of the future, which fuels public anxiety. According to psychologist Lazarus, anxiety is an emotion characterized primarily by ambiguity and uncertainty, which prevents us from coping with difficulties. This uncertainty arises from symbolic, existential, and ephemeral threat of the future. The existential source of the threat gives anxiety a strong motivation to objectify it in order to control or cope with it. So clearly, in the face of widespread anxiety in societies, religion becomes a very convenient tool for political mobilization. Religion plays an important role in objectifying the threat. For example, the other, the enemy, as well as providing a certain sense of security in the face of that existential threat. In addition, religion communities themselves get entangled in the distribution of power. So today's lecture will focus on the relationship between religion, the nation state, nationalism, and populism, or rather, the distinction between them. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jocelyn Cesari to give a lecture called Why Religious Nationalism is Not Populism. The professor holds the chair of religion and politics at the University of Birmingham. She's a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University. Since 2018, she is a visiting professor of religion, violence, and peace building at Harvard Divinity School. And her most recent book, called We, God's Nations, Political Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism in the World of Nations, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2022. So at this point, I will give the floor or microphone to the professor to proceed with the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and also thank you for having me. I believe that the second time I participate in the summer school. Most of what I'm going to say is motivated indeed by the book you mentioned, which is We God's People, not God's Nation, which is an interesting shift that I will talk about. So the book was looking at the entanglement between religion and nation. And it was not written with populism in mind. And while I was writing the book, as you know, because I live in the US, there was a lot of discussion on the Trump followers and how much they embody Christian nationalism. And that's why I was quite, and I remain quite skeptical that the way to talk about the white supremacists who are the followers of Trump are really all Christian nationalism or Christian nationalist. And so that will be my thread today, in the sense that I think they are religious populists, but it doesn't mean that they are automatically religious or Christian nationalist. So I'm going to share my screen and I will walk you through this argument. So all of you can see now, correct? Okay. Do I move this now? So since last time I was discussing a similar topic with you a year ago, lots of things have changed. Actually, lots of publications have been released dealing with this interaction between religion and populism. And if we look at the way that they are located within the broader field of populist studies, which is not, as you know, actually centered on religion as such. They hit the three main threads of literature on populism, which is ideational, performative, and strategic. So to start with, as you know, there is no consensus on the definition of populism. The most, I would say, overlapping agreement is to look at populism both as a claim of the people, defined as an homogeneous, virtuous group, which is under threat. So that would be the first level, the horizontal level of what populism is. And based on this understanding or identification to the people, there is a deliberate negative understanding or conception of the elite. So what we are witnessing is in most populism, not only the religious one, is the cohesion of the people, who are the virtuous people, who are the mistreated people, the misunderstood people, against a political establishment which is corrupted, which is based on a legal, rational approach to politics, and that doesn't take them into account. So you have this repertoire across different kinds of political movement today. So when the scholars look at religion, they adopt more or less this minimal definition of populism. With the people, if I may summarize, against a corrupted establishment. So what do they do when they look at populism or religion and populism in this way? Most of the work is located in what's called ideational approach to populism, which you have to distinguish from ideology. Ideology would mean that all the populists have a coherent set of ideas that derive from religion and that is part of their political repertoire. So no populism is completely exempt from influence from nationalism, liberalism, communism, socialism. So the idea is that some ideas of populism are inserted in other ideologies or vice versa. So that's why the scholars prefer the term ideational rather than ideological, to avoid the misunderstanding that we are facing a coherent doctrine or system of ideas. So if you look at this thread, which is the dominant thread when it comes to religion and populism, you have a lot of work on what kind of ideas are used to foster this idea of a religious people on which most of religious populism are based. And so where does it come from? Does it come from the dominant religion? Does it come from other resources outside the nation? So you have a lot of work there. And actually the first studies on religion and populism were conducted among the right-wing populist or supremacist parties in Western Europe. And so with a Christian was seen as a label that allowed some of this party to present an homogeneous people against Islam. So that's the kind of approach that you see dominating now, although recently there have been a pushback against this very limited look at religion, to look more at something that has also consequences on politics. It's not just, as I said here, identity marker, because that would be the minimal use of religion by populist movement. It does also imply concrete action. So there is some concrete elements of religious populism that cannot be just understood by the use of Christian or Muslim or civilization against civilization. Okay. So that's the first thread. The second thread is performative, meaning the scholars look at the way that religious movements or political movements, use religion to enact some kind of understanding of the religious people. It can be ceremonies, it can be a ritual, it can be use of different symbols, use of different dress code. Usually this aspect goes also with ideational. It's sometimes very hard to draw the line between these three threads of literature. The third element is to look at the leader and look at the way that some political figure operate as charismatic actors and are invested in a lot of trust by the people who think we people as a religious community. And there have been a lot of work, as you know, done now. There is a lot of work in the making, but also past, done on Erdogan, on Modi, on Trump. You have a lot of work done on some of the leaders of the right-wing parties in Europe, like Wildert in the Netherlands. And so they look at the way that these people, the work on Trump is very representative of that. They look at the way of these leaders are using religion. So the underlying tone here is that they instrumentalize religion, which also I'm going to push back against that, because you cannot instrumentalize anything. It's not just because they are charismatic and smart and savvy in communication that what they are saying is working. It's because they are using a repertoire that echoes with the understanding that everybody in the country has about the political community and the nation. So let me go a little further with that. So what I want to insist here is that we are not paying enough attention to the history of religion in any of the given community where religious populists are operating. And here I don't want to overload you with a technical or conceptual term, but what is key here is a term that's called habitus. I'm not going to, if I start on habitus, my 40 minutes are going to go on that. But it's what you would call in more simplistic terms, national ego, that everybody share, the secular like the religious. And that's important to get that. So in the case of the US, everybody, and I say everybody, has been socialized on the idea that the US is a God-guided nation. This is not an invention of Trump. And I give you here some of the reference. You may have heard of them. John Winthrop, America is a city on the hill. What is not usually cited is that because America is a city upon a hill, like a luminary for the whole world, it means that the political elite has responsibility to endorse God's message. And explicitly in his text, he calls for that. Do not forget that because you are responsible under God, you have to perform under God. So this is also part of what the kids are getting in school, independently of the regime. So that's what is part of this, what I call blueprint national ego, that everybody share. And that's why people can disagree. If they were not sharing anything, they could not even disagree. Unfortunately, we are at a stage in the US where it's beyond disagreement, and that's why there is a threat on democracy right there. It's about one excluding the other. And I have to say that unfortunately, it's also the case in India now. I would not say in Russia, like what people think. And so you have different way of pulling this subtext, so to speak, into a populist movement based on religion. So I give also here another example, which is the Manifest Destiny of 1854, which is also very central because it reaffirms the role of political leader under God's guidance, and it justifies the expansion of America towards the West and the submission and domination across different territory based exactly on that. And the idea is we are right because we are winning, meaning God is with us. I'm sorry to say that until now, right, left, up, down, this is also part of the narrative of America on the international scene. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that the leader doesn't instrumentalize anything. Trump doesn't refer to the Mahabharata. Nobody would understand him. Or he doesn't refer to the French national anthem. Nobody would understand him. He's using things that echoes with people. Either they accept, they exalt it, or they refuse it, but it means something. Okay, so do not take this influence as all agreement. What I am interested in here is the site of contestation. The moment that this narrative is imposed on everybody, you see contestation emerging. Okay. So an example of Trump, I could not, I'm sorry, I am not very good with the slide. Oh, sorry, that's not the one I want to show you. I don't know if this is gonna work. That was a link to the, so it's not working, to the inauguration of Trump, presidential inauguration. He had 6 speakers from faith traditions. 5 of them Christian, 1 Muslim, no, 1 Jewish, 1 rabbi. Interestingly, no Muslim. That was the first time, actually, that there was no Muslim present. And it shows the importance of Christianity from evangelical to other denomination as endorsing Trump as the president of America and the representative of God. So in this vision, and always the pushback is, wait, but Trump is not a very particularly pious man. From the religious point of view and the people who are identifying to America as a Christian community or Christian people, it is not important that the guide is not pious. They don't see him as a religious guide. They see him as a tool of God to advance the cause that they consider it's also the cause of God. So it's about, about belonging to a nation that is seen as Christian, but it doesn't mean that the political leader has to behave like a Christian. That's actually the same kind of identification with Putin. Putin is obviously not a pious Orthodox, although he makes big efforts to appear as such in the public space. If I can compare, that's not the case of Erdogan, because Erdogan has built, and I will say maybe a few words in Q&A. I didn't take Turkey as such as a case study, but I welcome any question. Erdogan has made its point since its first mandate, not only now, but since the beginning of his political ascension, that he represents pious Turks against the secular, corrupted Kemalist elite. So if I move to Russia, which is also a good example of that, if you look at the national narrative, that's interesting because a lot of scholars would say that there is no nation in Russia. Russia went from the Tsarist empire to the communist empire. There was no real investment in the nation, and it's happening now, and it's unfolding under our eyes. And that's why the war against Ukraine is very symbolically important here in terms of defining the boundaries of the Russian nation. And because of the past discussion that goes back to the political leadership of the patriarch until Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great as an empress will be the one secularizing the patriarchate and actually abolishing it to create a synod of different figures of the establishment of the Russian Orthodox Church under control of the state of, let's say, imperial bureaucracy at the time. Interestingly, can you take a guess which regime reinstalled the patriarchate? The Bolshevik. Okay, that's the habitus. So of course they didn't do it because they thought that because they wanted to control. All political leaders want to control this powerful matrix of mobilization that is associated with the idea that Russia is Holy Rus. Holy Rus is like the third or fourth row, meaning this is the center of sacred that has taken Russian people as the messenger of God after Byzantine Empire, Roman Empire, okay? And this is still discussed now in the secular nation state of federation that have become Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it's also a discussion that is not only within the political elite or within the patriarchate itself, it's also in the cultural discussion. There are polls that show that the Russian citizens are not particularly observant, but they strongly think that being Russian and being Orthodox and being Slavic are pretty much the same thing. Hence, the legitimation of the war in Ukraine by the patriarchate. It's part of this national ego that in the case of Russia, and that's why it's very interesting, it's in the making right now. So I don't know if the outcome of the war in Ukraine will change something in the sense of this identification with the Slavic world beyond the border, the territorial border of the secular Russia, but that's what is happening now. So that's one aspect. The second aspect that none of the work I mentioned before really look into, and that for me is the concrete aspect of religion in terms of policy making. This populist movement do not just say that they are Christian and American or Russian and Orthodox. They are also actively working on changing secular laws to make them conform to some of the religious prescription. So in America, the fight is about abortion, contraception, about limiting the rights of sexual minorities, and that's why Trump has become such a fighter for laws that will regress or return to some of the rights that were given before, with an agreement of a big chunk of the American population. The problem today in America is that the country is exactly split in two. That's why it's impossible to even have a discussion, because the one that are defending abortion, contraception, sexual minorities are almost at the same amount in terms of demographic than the one who are refusing it. And the problem is that the half of the country for decades was not even present in the political debate. in the political establishment. So it's in some way also a way for them to take revenge, saying you don't understand us, you don't carry our values, you have oppressed us culturally, politically. So that's the pushback we are seeing everywhere. And Trump, in this regard, has been a vehicle for that. In the case of Russia, it's very interesting because as I said, the Russian citizen identify to orthodoxy, and they see the patriarchate as a moral figure. But, you know, they come out of half a century of communist regime. And so they have very secular practices or behavior. So that's where you have to distinguish what element of religion is significant here. So they are not particularly active on supporting the patriarchate, on abortion, contraception, no sex before marriage, which is something that the patriarchate is really insisting on, but with no real success, unlike Trump. And again, here the masses matter, meaning the people, even if they are Orthodox nationalists, are not particularly eager to return to a more moralized conception of the public space. There have been also attempts by the patriarchate to reintroduce religious instruction in the curriculum. And this has been pushed back by everybody, including the member of the Putin entourage who are in favor of the patriarchate or the alliance with the patriarchate. So this tells you also that's a kind of context you have to take into account to see how populism is unfolding with religion within, either it's believing or belonging, and also in terms of alliance. The moral policies happen when there is a clear alliance between the clerical establishment of the dominant religion, the one who define the identity of the people. So the clerics of this religion, when they make a clear cooperation with the charismatic or populist leader, it does advance the cause, and it does also help, so to speak, quote unquote, the religious policy making, what I call moral policy. In the case of Russia, the only open space that has been actively invested in terms of legislation is blasphemy. And interestingly, because it's a secular country, actually Russia is a secular country for the first time since 1997, since the constitution of 1997, all religion are recognized. I mean, not all, the state has to recognize them. They are called traditional religion. So it's Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Buddhism, Islam. Interestingly, all the Protestant group coming from the US, evangelical in particular, are not recognized, with the consensus of all the other religious groups that back the state control and prohibition. Okay, and that's why the patriarchate is very happy of this cooperation with the state administration on this issue. So interestingly, the blasphemy law were easy to pass because all religious groups agree on that. And it's done in a way that, of course, I mean, if you insult Orthodoxy, you may be more in trouble than if you insult Catholicism in some remote part of the country, but the law is there. And it came after this female group called Pussy Riots did a demonstration in front of a church. Actually, it was more than in front, it was on the steps of the church. And they went in jail for that. So these are the new legislation taken up by Putin administration. Another interesting change in legislation, this time in the constitution. As you may recall, a couple of years back, Putin amended the constitution, and that's the first time that is the first time that the rules in the cultural sense, but it means that that was done by the patriarchate influence. The reference to the rules as people is mentioned in the Constitution. So these are not just ideas. These are clearly legislation that have concrete consequences on people, especially when it comes to those sexual politics. And again, but this I am not surprised, having looked at religion and politics in different contexts. Women and the body of women is the hottest site of contestation. In America, in Russia, in Turkey, in India too. Look at the current discussion. You can say that Modi has moved into religious populism with new law that are explicitly geared at prohibiting conversion for religious reasons. That has been taken up in the Uttar Pradesh state, which has a majority of Muslims. This is a kind of moral policy. So in India, if I had to add here, it would be about inter-religious marriages, because it goes with this big fear or phobia that is unfounded, but unfortunately it doesn't matter because it fuels this kind of politic, which is called the love jihad, where Muslim men are accused to take or kidnap Hindu women to force them into Muslim marriages. So that's where I can show you that religious nationalism is not religious populism. To be religious populism has to operate on the two levels, meaning not only saying we Christian, but also actively try to change the political establishment to remove the secular influences, not only in terms of personnel, but also in terms of laws, procedures, administrative management. And that's why I think the term of religious populism is more adequate to understand what's happening with Trump followers in the US than religious nationalism. Because even now you have surveys that show that the majority of Americans are very comfortable saying that they are Christian and American, and that America is a Christian nation, but they don't refer it as something that is automatically exclusive. They see it as part of a legacy that for them is associated with progress. We can discuss if this is true or not. Actually, if you look at the political history of America, Christian has always been there, either pro-slavery or anti-slavery, either for expansion or not expansion. You can find the Christian narrative in all aspects. So in this sense, you can say indeed that America is Christian in this cultural sense, and that's where religious nationalism can exist. The moment people use this religious element of their history, the religious symbols, the religious rituals, to exclude others, that's where you can describe this as religious populism. And that's why I think that even in India, even if India was secular, some elements of the Hindu history, of the understanding of India as a modern nation, I wrote a whole chapter on that in the new book. There was always some element of Hindu background, because at the end of the day, who created the secular modern India? The upper class, the Brahman. And so even Gandhi, when he said we can all live together, he thinks that there is something that makes Hinduism legitimate, and he said with Islam and other religion as building this secular nation. So in this sense, the secularism in India is not about rejection of religion. It's about the attempt to make coexist all religion. We are today at a stage where the institutional framework that allows this is currently under attack by Modi to give priority to one religion. So that's why I also gave you this little piece to discuss, to read, because I think it's very politically dangerous in the US to call the Trump followers as Christian nationalists, because it does completely eliminate a lot of Christians who are not supremacists, who are not intolerant of other religion from the discussion. And what does it leave? It leaves the so-called secular, liberal, political, mediatic, academic establishment facing the other group. And that's the worst situation that can happen. And that's why American democracy is more than in danger. I think it is crumbling in different parts because of that. So I think I have already pretty much, that was my last slide. So yeah.